That was awesome.
Oh,
Okay.
fabulous. You look fantastic. Thank you for
Oh,
joining us.
that's how.
We're
I
so
took my
happy to have you.
lady. Um, my gosh, what was it? Like last night, I told the lady, I was like, you got to do my braids big because I'm taking out these tiny things for 9.5 hours. I can't do it. So,
Well, it looks fabulous. You look fantastic. You look gorgeous. Thank you
oh,
for
thank
coming.
you.
Okay,
Of
so
course.
for our followers who are tuned in right now, just as a reminder, we are Mental Health Global Network. I am Juliet Meskers, and here at Mental Health First Aid, we provide mental health educational resources and programming. And today we are here with Lila Estime, who is the writer behind the blog Bantu Rights. And she's going to talk to us today a little bit about Black mental health and the racial injustice that's going on in this country and what we can do to help. So thank you so much for being here today with us, Lila.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for
So,
having
of course. So, Lila, can you tell us in your own words a little bit more about your blog, inspiration behind it, and what kind of content your followers can expect to see from you?
So with my blog, Bantu Rights, I have to say I didn't know what I was doing when I first started it. I just knew I had a passion for social justice, Black girl fitness, and basically anything Black girl magic. So I was like, I want my followers, especially women of color, to really gravitate to my blog and just to see what it's all about and kind of get comfortable with the message that I want to relay, which is that Black lives do matter. My blog was started 3 years ago in 2017, and I absolutely love writing. I actually used to write poems when I was younger. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of button poetry or like Def Jam poetry. I was obsessed. Like when I say obsessed, I mean like I loved it.
I
Like
love that.
all the spoken word stuff. I mean, that's so me. I actually still want to do that one day. And,
Yeah,
my birthday's on Valentine's Day, so, I'm all like roses are red,
right.
violets are blue. I think
You
that's
do
just
have a
from the
Valentine's
honesty.
birthday.
And so I had a passion for writing. I talk a lot, and I felt like there were some things that I was just ever so passionate about. I felt like I wanted to write about it. So my blog is there for Black women who want to read about social justice, who want to learn about things that they haven't known, and just to normalize the fact that, a lot of the normal things that we have been doing are criticized. People are getting killed for it. So, I had
Right.
to just, yeah.
Well, your blog is amazing. I've been following it for a while. You're a fantastic writer, and I really encourage any of our followers to go and go and follow you. So we have you tagged. So we're so happy to have you here today to give us some advice. And one of my questions I have for you is, as this country continues to face the pandemic of social injustice and systematic racism, what are some ways that you are encouraging your followers to get involved, and what are the best ways that they can stand up against this violence and educate themselves?
Yes. So I have said for the past maybe month that we are dealing with two pandemics. One pandemic has gone longer than the other, right? 400 years. So I have encouraged my followers, especially because I grew up in Easton, Connecticut, a very predominantly white area. We are right tomorrow at 1:30 raising our first um, LGBT flag ever in this town. We had our first Juneteenth event. So I'm encouraging my followers to read, to learn, but not only that, do the inner work. I know I've seen, there's a lot of difference of opinion on what inner work really means, but doing the inner work is so important because that way you ever heard like the saying, if you can't love yourself, you can't love anybody else?
Yes.
If you can't do the inner work, you won't be able to relay that love and that you won't be able to sympathize with anyone else. So I just feel like if I were to say one thing right now to my friends, my followers, you know, the people that are trying to learn at this point in time. I mean, this is like the revolution of what, Montgomery's March, but now we're in 2020. And so it's insane. It gives me goosebumps some days, but I say that we still have to keep going, read, learn, talk to your peers that are of color, talk to your friends that have gone through these experiences and learn from them. And don't be afraid to learn from them. I mean, that's certainly how I feel about it. Just don't be afraid to learn. Be uncomfortable.
Yeah, be uncomfortable. And if you could give one piece of advice to someone who wants to start being an activist, I know, you know, we say it starts, you're saying it starts with the inner work, it starts with accepting yourself and loving yourself,
Yep.
you know, teaching yourself to love others, understanding others, practicing empathy.
Yeah.
Educating, reading books, watching movies. But for people who are ready to take those steps towards activism, you know, standing up, speaking out, going to marches or protests, what would be your best advice for someone who's like, I want to do more than just read or just post, but like I don't know how to do that? What's the best way that you would recommend for people to get involved in their communities?
So I honestly was going to say read. Oh,
okay.
Read. But, you know, if you don't feel like you can read, if you don't feel like you can post, I would say do the inner work, talk with your family members. This is a book that I love. It's called The Autobiography of Malcolm X, as told by Haley. And you know what? When I read this book a few years ago, I learned things myself. We all have work to do. So if you're saying to yourself, I find it boring to read these things, I find it, you know, I don't want to go to protests, then you know what? Watch a movie. Watch When They See Us. Watch 13th on Netflix. These things are there for not only our entertainment, but for learning purposes. I love Netflix for that reason. I've watched so many documentaries where I've said to myself, this is so important, and yet it is so interesting the way they create it. So I would certainly say that, I mean, you gotta read. You gotta read something. If you're not gonna read a book, you've got to look online and read it. That is how we'll move forward. It's not a surprise that a lot of academic institutions in higher education, most people in higher education really they're on the right side of history, right? It's not a surprise. It's not a surprise that people that have either are currently in higher education like myself, or like you have graduated in higher education. It's not a surprise that these people are on the right side of history because they have read, because they took a class that was sociology. And so maybe you didn't go to higher education. Maybe you need to just pick up this book and just say to yourself, this is what's important.
Forcing yourself to do those things that you would typically dread if you're not a fan of reading, but you know, this is something I need to do because it's important. It's going to make a difference. It's going to make me a better person.
Yes. And like I said, I personally find that talking to people is just so it for me. You just learn so much by being there in the present and being able to say, what is redlining? And why does this happen in certain states? And why does this happen in certain towns? And how far back in history has this gone to the point that it's now being circulated and detrimental to Black people today?
Yeah, absolutely. And so if you wouldn't mind sharing, what are some ways that you've either experienced racism firsthand or you've witnessed racism firsthand, And how has that impacted your mental health? And how do you think that that impacts the mental health of Black people all over the country and the world?
So racism is is a pandemic. Racism is probably one of the biggest reasons why many African Americans feel like this country is not working for the benefit of them. The biggest reason, you know, despite life's challenges. Um, I have to say, I lived in a town where I came from from loving friends, from loving parents, but here and there I would experience different things. It was, you know, I don't want to share too many stories, but
Share
some
what you want.
things,
That's what we're here.
you know, some things I guess made not only me uncomfortable, but the person uncomfortable. Sometimes it was like passive racism, where, you know, I'm not trying to catch any tears, but maybe this person didn't know what they said and they felt like, you know, this was something that I didn't mean, but yeah, it's hidden and rooted in racism.
Right.
So I certainly feel like you asked me how do I feel that affects people today? Well, if you don't know that affects Black Americans today, then you're not waking up. Um, Prejudice behavior in town. I just listened to the radio in Weston here in Connecticut. There is 13% African Americans in this country, and so we have Black Americans that are 20% more um, depressed, having anxiety, needing help than white Americans. And that is certainly an issue. That is that's a horrible thing, especially when you think about suicide rates. Whereas white people are, I don't want to say, yeah, they're committing suicide more, but Black people are attempting it more. And these are facts. Those are facts that have been reported. So when you think about that, you're kind of like asking yourself, well, why is this so? And what does this have to do with systematic racism or systemic racism in our country? It has a lot to do with it. When you live in a lower income area, remember, I grew up here, but I used to live in Harlem, and I've seen things, and my parents used to live in Brooklyn. So when you live in a lower income area, it is a total different experience from an experience somewhere like here, or it's a totally different experience as far as your well-being, your fitness, your mental fitness. I'm a person that really cares about that stuff. And so when I look at the lines, when I look at the zoning areas in our country, it is quite disturbing when you have schools in lower income areas trying to support their towns. Does that make any sense when the houses and the apartments and where you're living is not even enough money to help your child in school, to help your child continue their education, for funds like after school activities, after school programs? I used to go to the ECC every single day, right? I don't even think I paid a dime because that was my school paying for it. Those were where our tax dollars went.
Right.
So when we say, and I know I'm going off a tangent, but
No, it's not a tangent. It's important.
when we say defund the police, we're saying, and we were laughing, me and a friend and I were laughing because it's such a funny thing to say defund the police, but it's such an easy thing to say because we can't. It's easy. It's a beautiful catchphrase as opposed to saying give all the billions of dollars and millions of dollars that are increasing each and every year for
And the
for the police
access.
department into the community. So I certainly feel like mental health is so important. I feel like in the Black community, it should certainly be talked about a lot more. I did write a blog on mental health that speaks about activism and seeing Black death in on not only the news, but just circulating online is not only horrific, but it definitely creates a sort of trauma that you would think that a Black American like myself would not have to think about or see ever again because, you know, it was 400 years ago, but you have this stuff happening now. And I think that's one of the most dangerous things and then one of the most misconceptions of what we've learned in school versus what is happening in 2020.
Yeah. And when we talk about the allocation of resources in communities, I think, you know, defunding the police is such an important part of that discussion. People people have this misconception that defund the police means that you're just going to take police officers away, you're just going to take away safety and protection. But the concept isn't completely ridding of police. It's taking the excess money that is going towards police departments that is unnecessary and actually not even being utilized most of the time, and putting it into towns and communities for after school programs,
right,
for you know, Big Brother Big Sister programs, for opening gyms and community centers where people can work out, because that's so important to your mental health. To have access to parks is important for the mental health of kids, to be able to have safe places to play. And there's going to be a decrease in crime when people are able to grow up in safer, more educated, more empowering areas, because their town and their state was able to create the funding for them to do that. And so that's such an important, it's all a chain effect, and people are failing to recognize that. It's not even just about taking money away from the police to give to, you know, psychologists and, you know, other first response areas, which is going to be extremely helpful as well. But it starts at the bottom, the chain effect of, you know, giving money to schools and to programs for children so that they can have better, healthier, happier lives. That's going to impact their mental health and, you know, decrease, you know, their inability to thrive as an adult.
Exactly. Precisely. Yes. And I love how you mentioned that crime rate will go down. Crime rate will certainly go down simply because people will have the resources that they need. People are not stealing a loaf of bread or whatever the case may be because they want to. They feel like this is the only way that they'll be able to eat. This is the only way that they'll be able to survive. And when you think about that aspect, you take out police and you put in social worker. I mean, this is just like, in my head, total common sense, but in America, it is like punishment, 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 and then of course 10 times over when you're Black.
Yeah. I saw somewhere recently that someone spent 25 years in jail because they stole something for $8 from a store for $8 that was like candy and food or something like that. And they spent 25 years in jail. I mean, it's, you know, and disproportionately the money that is going to keep people in prison and to run prisons is costing the country even more money than it would have been to, you know, just have a proper conversation with someone over something like that, or to provide them with food, or, you know, it's just, it needs to be handled differently. And so I don't want to take up too much of your time today, but I was wondering if you would be willing to talk to me a little bit about racial trauma and what that means, and how, and, you know, maybe some statistics, or what does Black mental health mean, and what are the differences between the psychological impacts of Black people in the country and white people in the country, and, you know, what are those differences between the mental health and their resources to cope?
So there are plenty of resources. I have seen so many online, but also there are so many numbers to call. You've got the Mental Health Association where you can sit down and talk with somebody. But I certainly believe that it's important for people to realize that racial trauma in the Black community is so much different than any other type of trauma. So, I mean, there's a total predisposition about that in itself. Racial trauma is stemmed from racism. So when you ask me what exactly is racial trauma, I would have to tell you it is not being able to borrow money from the bank because you are Black. It is redlining, and like I said, it is zoning. Mass incarceration is one of the biggest ways to get Black people into prison and doing prison labor work for the country. And I think that is traumatizing when you have making money off of phone calls and FaceTimes in prison. That's abuse. And not only that, it certainly affects the mental health of Black Americans.
Right. And so I imagine it must be traumatizing as well to be a witness to these things. So even if you're not the one being incarcerated, or if you're not the one losing your life or having your physical health damaged by a police officer or by someone who is, you know, promoting violence and racism, that to be a part of that community or to have a loved one that you know is experiencing is definitely going to be anxiety inducing, because not only are you worried about your loved ones and the people around you who are being impacted about this, but I imagine that it must create a culture of fear as well, to not feel safe in certain situations, you know, getting pulled over, you know, a white person getting pulled over compared to a Black person getting pulled over.
Yeah.
Different experience.
Total different experience. That's trauma in itself. I can't even imagine or go into, because right now, even as I think about that, I'm thinking about Philando Castile, and I'm thinking about the ways people have actually followed direction and still have been reprimanded and essentially just killed because of this. So right. Yes, that's certainly part of racial trauma. I remember when I was, if you want me to give you an example, I don't want to say it was, you know, perpetrated on me by somebody else, but when I was driving back from Penn State and driving home and driving to school, I remember, you know, posting this online because I wanted people to know what my mom and my dad were telling me at this point in time. And it's something, believe it or not, I mean, we obviously talk about racial issues. We've had that talk, as they say. But, you know, she had me tape my stuff to the seat. And you have Black Americans actually taping their IDs and all that stuff to the window so that they don't have any problems with the police. And that's not normal. And that certainly is a part of racial trauma. Being stopped because you look suspicious, like Trayvon Martin, or in general, playing with maybe a toy gun, and being reprimanded and just realizing that you can't even be a kid. You can't even be 15 years old, Tamir Rice. And to know that the media will also portray young Black Americans, men and women, as women and men instead of as boys and girls. You know, and
absolutely.
You know?
Yeah, that's a really good point to bring up.
Yes. Yeah, I think that is, you know, female and male, but they portray them as women and men, and instead of as boys and girls, the way it should be.
Right. I mean, when I was a child, I never worried about, you know, I never had a fear of police. I never had a fear of anybody projecting any kind of racism on me, or considering me to have to be held to a higher standard because of the color of my skin. It is not fair for young African Americans to have those discussions with their parents that you will be treated differently. You are at higher risk of getting harmed or hurt. I mean, that's not fair for a child to lose their innocence in that kind of way, because they have to be aware of different things than a white person would. And, you know, going back to the discussion about being pulled over, I know that I've had extreme white privilege in those situations. You know, I remember I was driving one time and I went through a drive-through, and I forgot my Easy Pass. So I got up to the pole and I realized the pole wasn't opening. I didn't have my Easy Pass. Police officer stops me. He's like, "Do you have your license?" I'm like, "Yes." I go to my wallet. I go to find my wallet in my bag. I realize my wallet's in the trunk. He let me get out, go into my trunk, get my wallet. Would that ever? No, that is total white privilege. Should I have been allowed to do that? No. The rule is that you have your license on you. And there are people who have been killed, shot, lost an arm because they went into their pocket where you would keep your license in your wallet to get it out by following the rules, and they were injured. And so I think it's so important that we think about situations like that for people who say we don't have white privilege, or I've gotten pulled over before. Yeah, but how is your situation different than someone who ended up dead or ended up injured?
Exactly. Yeah.
So before we close out today, I would love to know, you have this amazing blog, you're super into fitness, you're super into writing, self-care. What are some ways that you prioritize your mental health, or that you stay on top of it? What makes you happy?
So I have to say, I'm so happy to join Mental Health First Aid, and I'm so happy to join you guys, just globally affecting everyone and just being able to talk to us about how important this is. I love working out. I find it so therapeutic, but it's so important to also realize that this is not the only way you can get help. What I do is I like to write, I work out, trying to think of anything other than working out, but I find fitness to be such a relief for me that it's like my go-to. But talking to someone is just as important. There is this stigma that you guys are breaking all the time. With every single post and every single, sense of awareness to everybody else, is that you can see somebody, you can talk with somebody, whether it be a friend, a therapist, psychologist, psychiatrist, and with these things that you're going through, trauma, racial inequity, and inequality, it's certainly important that you do get help.
Yes, absolutely.
Some of the things that, like I said, I work out and I read and what else do I do? I used to write poems, but now I just write on my blog. But certainly fitness releases just a lot of endorphins, and it just makes you really happy. So for me, that has always been my go-to. Running has always been certainly something that I really, 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 how do I say this, can appreciate.
Yeah.
With music and just being able to have also some solitude, to sit by yourself and try and figure out how to go about your day or how to go about your week. Like, I love that post that you guys had, which is like, which was talking about certain things that you could do at the beginning of the week in order to kind of plan out your week and have maybe a less stressful week. Racism is stressful. Racial trauma is stress on the body. And when you have things like that mixed with stores that are nothing like Trader Joe's or Whole Foods and just sell things that are not exactly healthy for you, and when you're surrounded around that negativity, there isn't room for growth, because that's where you live, that's your community. So I certainly feel like communities in this nation need to do better with mental health for Black Americans by providing other ways of not only relief, but other ways to manage their wellness.
Yeah, self-coping.
Like this.
Yeah, and people need to have, those resources available, those coping mechanisms taught to them. You bring up a really good point. You've gone back and forth a lot to say, like, this is what works for me. Exercising works for me, running works for me. But sometimes that's not going to be enough for someone, or sometimes people don't have the availability to do that. So what's another great way to do? Talk to someone. There's so many ways that we can stay on top of our mental health. Like you said, from Easton, Connecticut. I'm from Easton, Connecticut. We have gyms around us. Outside of COVID, we have gyms around us. We have healthy, safe, clean places that we can go work out. But not every community has that. And so it's important to recognize that, that's part of the change that needs to be made. My cat just jumped on my lap. That's part of the change that needs to be made. And that's, the responsibility the state and our country to create funding for that, but also talking to someone. So I just wanted to share something that I learned is that there's a foundation called the Boris Lawrence Henson Foundation, and they're providing free therapy for people of color. So you can text no stigma to 707070, and I'll post that on our page as well. And if you do that, they'll help you come up with resources. So it's been so amazing talking with you today, Lila. I learned so much. I know our viewers learned so much, and it's so important to have these conversations. So, I mean, it's really just been fabulous having you today, and I'm so thankful to have you join. She's got her butt in the camera. I'm sorry. Okay, well, thank you so much, Lila. Was there any final notes that you wanted to share before we finish out today?
I just wanted to say thank you so much for having me, Julia. I'm so happy that I'm talking with someone from town. Go Easton! You know, I'm trying to create as much change here as I can, going to school 5 minutes away and just being in town and dealing with 2 cocktails of chaos. So
yes, absolutely. Yeah. Well, everybody go and follow Bantu Rights. It's an amazing, amazing, amazing blog. We tagged it in our most recent post. Follow Lila. She's constantly posting amazing information, resources, you know, poetry, pictures, everything. So thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in today. And Lila will be in touch. Thank you for everything you do. Bye.
Bye.